Okay, chapter 19. At dawn, Erica's cries woke me with a jolt that nearly knocked me out of my bed. "Mommy!" she screamed. "Mommy!" I ran into the hall and followed Mom and Dad into Erica's bedroom. My sister flung herself at Mom, crying hysterically. Over her head, Mom stared at Dad, her eyes wide with shock. Both looked as if they were sleepwalking, groggy, unsteady, trembling. "Erica, oh Erica," Mom cried. "It's you. It's really you. Oh, darling, you've come home at last." "We thought we lost you," Dad whispered. "And then, when Daniel brought you home, his voice broke for a second. "We didn't even recognize you." I don't think Erica heard a word my parents said. She was still caught in the snares of her dream. "Hold me tight, Mommy. Don't let Auntie come for me. Keep her away." Mom rocked Erica as if she were a baby, murmured to her, held her tight. "We won't let anyone take you away." Gradually, Erica stopped crying, but she shivered and shook and looked around fearfully as if she expected to see Auntie's face at the window. "You're safe now," Dad said. "Don't be afraid. It was just a dream." It was then that Erica noticed her hands. "Why are my hands so dirty?" Pulling away from Mom, she stared at her reflection in the mirror over the bureau. A wild-eyed girl with tangled hair and a dirty, bruised face stared back at her. "What's happened to me?" Mom looked at Dad as if she wasn't sure what to say. "You've been missing for almost a week," Dad finally said. "Daniel found you on Brewster's Hill last night," Mom added, "and brought you home." "What were you doing up there in the cold?" Dad asked. "We've searched every square inch of the woods, the creeks, the lake, and no one found a trace of you, and now you're here. It's a miracle." Erica looked puzzled. "I was looking for my doll with Daniel. We couldn't find her. Someone took her." Pausing to catch her breath, Erica spread her fingers and steadied her broken nails with the dirt ground into her skin. With a shudder, she flung herself back into Mom's arms. "And then someone took me." Mom held Erica, hugging her and stroking her hair. "No," she murmured. "You were lost, but now you're home. We'll never let anyone take you from us." We sat with Erica for a long time, soothing her, calming her. At last, just as morning light filled the room, she relaxed and fell asleep. Mom told Dad and me to go to bed. "I'll stay and watch over her," she whispered. "I don't want her to wake up frightened again." Even though it was morning, I did what Mom said. I was warm and safe. I brought my sister home, and she was sleeping in her own bed. As soon as I pulled the covers up, I dropped into a sleep like a stone falling into a well. When I came downstairs, Dad was in the kitchen. While I'd been sleeping, he'd shaved, showered, and exchanged his sweatpants for jeans and his sweatshirt for a wool sweater. He'd washed the dishes and taken out the trash. He'd swept the floor and scrubbed the countertops. The smell of freshly made coffee filled the air. "You must not have gone back to bed," I said. "I couldn't sleep, so I cleaned up the place." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. "I apologize for not believing you, Daniel," he said, "but you have to admit your story sounded like something out of a fairy tale. Old conjure women roaming the mountains, stealing children, keeping them for 50 years. I'm a practical man, a rational man. I've never believed in the supernatural." He frowned and rubbed his chin. Except for the uncertainty in his eyes, he looked like himself. "I had never believed in old Auntie when we lived in Connecticut, but here, well, crazy as it sounds, I can't come up with any other explanation." I looked at him surprised. "You believe me?" "Like I said, what other explanation is there? Erica couldn't have survived on her own in this cold. There's no evidence that she was kidnapped by a passing stranger. Her dream fits in with what you've told me about that conjure woman, or witch, or whatever she is or was." He drank more coffee and stared past me at nothing in particular. "And then there's Celine," he added. "Surely the O'Neills are too sane to believe in old stories unless there's some truth to them." Before I could say another word, someone began pounding at the back door. "Mama!" a voice cried. "Daddy, it's me! Let me in! Let me in!" Dad was so startled he almost spilled what was left of his coffee, but I jumped up and flung the door open. Celine stood on the porch, staring at me. "Who are you?" she asked. "What are you doing in my house? Where's my mother? Who's that man at the table? Don't you remember me?" "I've never seen you in my life." Pushing me aside, she headed toward the back stairs. "Mama, Daddy, it's me," she called. "Where are you?" Before Celine was halfway up the steps, Mrs. O'Neill followed her into the kitchen. "Wait," she cried to the nearly hysterical girl. "I need to tell you something." Celine ignored her. "Mama!" she screamed. "Mama!" Her eyes darted around the kitchen. "What have you done with our table? Where are our chairs? And the clock on the wall? And the calendar by the door? And the curtains Mama made?" Dodging Mrs. O'Neill, she ran into the hall. We heard her go from room to room, her feet clattering across the floor. "This isn't right. This isn't our couch, not our chairs. Where's the wallpaper? Mama! Daddy!" Her voice rose with every word. Mrs. O'Neill caught her at the foot of the front of the stairway. Celine, I know everything seems wrong and you're scared, but you must be still and listen to me." What are you and those people doing in my house?" Celine cried. "Why have you changed all our furniture? Where's my mother and my father and Nadine?" Please, Celine, let me explain." Mrs. O'Neill managed to lead the girl into the living room. "Here," she said gently, "sit with me and I'll tell you the best I can." Celine sat on the edge of the couch and stared at Mrs. O'Neill, her face pale, her eyes huge. She asked, "Has something terrible happened to them? Is that it?" "Oh, my dear child," Mrs. O'Neill said sadly, "I hardly know where to begin." Silently, I went back to the kitchen. Dad had made another pot of coffee. Upstairs, Mom was giving Erica a bath. In the living room, Mrs. O'Neill murmured to Celine. For now, at least, the house was quiet, the way it used to be. We sat together silently, Dad and I. Neither of us knew what to say. He drank his coffee and stared out the window, his face expressionless. I'd had time to adjust to the reality of witchcraft and spells and hogs that walked on their hind legs, but just a few hours earlier, old Auntie had turned my parents' beliefs about the nature of reality upside down. Maybe they should visit Miss Perkins. She could explain the way things were in Woodville. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Scrubbed clean, her hair washed, brushed and combed, wearing clean clothes, Erica seemed to be exactly the same as before, until you saw the bruises on her face, until you looked into her eyes and saw the shadows there. She'd been somewhere only she and Celine knew about. Mom had washed her hair, too, and finally changed her clothes. Like Erica, she seemed her old self, the mother I knew, except her face had wrinkles I hadn't noticed before, and there were new gray streaks in her hair. Erica sat beside me. "You look really nice," I told her. She put her hands over her face and tried to hide the bruises. "I look awful." Mom opened a catalog and showed Erica a page. "I know how much you loved your doll," she said. "We can order another just like her." With a look of horror, Erica shoved the catalog away so fast she knocked over the glass of orange juice Dad had set in front of her. "Get that picture away from me," she shouted. "I hate that doll. Throw the catalog away. Burn it up." "But Erica," Mom began. "No!" When Erica began to cry, Mom hugged her. "It's all right, honey. I just thought—" Her voice trailed away as she stroked Erica's hair. I glanced at the catalog lying open on the floor. There she was, little Erica, red hair and all. "Oh, Mom," I thought, "if you only knew." I picked up the catalog and carried it to the garbage can. No more little Erica. Once Erica calmed down, Dad asked, "Who wants pancakes for breakfast?" He seemed to be making a huge effort to act as if this were an ordinary morning. Mrs. O'Neill appeared in the doorway. "Did we hear something about pancakes?" Pale and quiet, Celine followed her into the kitchen. While Dad stirred the batter, Mrs. O'Neill urged Celine to join us at the table, but she shook her head and held back. "Who's that?" Erica asked. "Celine," Mom said. "She lives down the road with Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill." "She's your age," I told Erica. Erica slid out of her chair and crossed the room. Taking Celine's hand, she said, "Come sit beside me. We're going to be friends, you and me. I just know it." Erica led Celine to the chair next to her. "Do you like pancakes?" Celine nodded. "With maple syrup." "Coming right up." Dad set plates in front of Erica and Celine, and Mom passed the syrup. Before either girl picked up her fork, they studied each other for at least a minute. They didn't say a word, but I sensed something flowing back and forth between them. Slowly, Erica put her hand on Celine's hand and smiled at her. Celine smiled back. It was the first time I'd ever seen that girl look happy. After breakfast, Erica took her new friend upstairs. I heard Celine say, "You sleep in my old room." Then the door closed behind them. I looked around the quiet kitchen, which was neat and orderly again. Sunlight filled the corners that were once dark. No whispers disturbed the silence. Mrs. O'Neill took a sip of coffee. "I believe those girls will be good friends." Mom smiled. "Erica needs a friend." "So does Celine," Mrs. O'Neill said. After a little silence, Mrs. O'Neill added, "Thank goodness they've both forgotten Auntie and all that happened to them in the cabin." Except in dreams, I thought. Except in dreams.